Hi, I'm Brian Dunn, and welcome to the most important podcast ever. What makes it so important? It's not about me, it's about you. This podcast is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, the moments of resilience, the lessons learned, and the small acts that make a big difference. From retail floors to boardrooms, we'll share the untold stories that shape lives and careers. I'm very excited. This week, our guest is Eric Harkins, and Eric is the author of this book, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Eric is a fellow retail warrior with some very impressive experience. So I got this book. Great leaders make sure that Monday mornings doesn't suck. We're going to ask about the title, Eric. Um, I got it this week, and I set aside Thursday afternoon, and I was completely engrossed with your book and recognized so many things in it, and just so many the principles lined up, but two really important factors: your commitment as a Viking fan and your love of John Sanford books, which is a personal favorite of mine.
Yes.
So maybe we could start with you telling our audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brian. It's great to see you. I'm excited to join the podcast, and I have no doubt we're about to have a really fun conversation on leadership. But yeah, I had this really cool journey. I spent 25 years in corporate America in retail, lots of big box. Started right out of college as an intern at Target, and just kind of ended my career in more senior level roles, obviously, and then started my own consulting firm, which really works with companies and leaders on, making sure Monday morning doesn't suck. And I like to tell companies it's really not that hard if you're willing to make a couple of hard choices along the way. You can have a really cool place to work. So,
I want to dig into that, but I want to start with the title. How
yeah.
did you get to the title? I love the title.
Yeah, so great leaders make sure Monday morning doesn't suck. I got lucky. It's a title that sort of, I hadn't really thought about it at the time, kind of timeless, unfortunately.
Right, right,
Probably something
right.
we'll be talking about forever. And about 15 years ago, probably maybe 10 years ago, I was a head of HR for a company, and was having a fairly passionate conversation with our head of sales. We weren't necessarily in alignment on what leadership was and what leadership wasn't. And I just kind of in the moment, I said, listen, I don't care what your job title is. I don't care what your resume says you've done. And I don't care what we told you we thought you were supposed to do. If you lead people, you only have one job. Really, your only job is to make sure Monday morning doesn't suck. And we both looked at each other, and he's like, hey, I kind of like that. And I said, boy, that kind of stuck. And I used it ever since then. And when I was writing the book, I didn't have a title. And then I remembered that, and I thought that's got to be the title.
Well, it captured me right away.
Yeah.
And as I read it, you can see I have all these notes. It was really quite compelling. Um, you really talk a lot about culture, and I found it just so compelling.
Yeah.
And throughout the book, it's just very clear your belief is that that is the leader's primary, if not exclusive,
Yeah.
role.
Yeah. I mean, it starts at the top. And, I do a lot of keynote speaking. And one of the most common questions I get after I speak is, Eric, what happens, love your message, but what happens if the issue, the person who doesn't believe in culture is the CEO or is the most senior level leader? And I usually say, that's about when it's time to maybe start looking for your next opportunity, because it does. I had a leader once that said, listen, a fish rots from the head. And his point was it starts at the top. And I really am very passionate because, you know, I think about leaders like you who really showed up with just a genuine and authentic curiosity and interest in getting to know people, and that ability to connect with every employee at the same level, and they can tell you're listening. And I just am always fascinated with leaders that think you have to because you have an S or a V or an E or a C in front of your title, you have to show up different. It's like, no, I mean, be who you are and get to know people. And if you genuinely are excited about helping other people succeed, you can be a great leader. There's no secret sauce to it. I'm sure you would agree with that.
I do. And I always used to say it's really easy. All you have to do is show up and care and
Yeah.
have a vision for what good looks like.
Yeah.
But the key hook there is you have to actually care.
Yeah.
I think that's the one thing over time you can't fake.
No.
And I think when a leader's insincere,
Yeah.
it shows up quickly. Has that been your experience?
Oh, 100%. And, I think especially, and I talk a lot in the book about high performers. And, one of my main messages is you got to create a culture that high performers want to be a part of. And I use high performers intentionally because the people that don't want to be there that show up every day, we can talk about that in a little bit, I'm sure. But the high performers know when you're genuine and authentic, and they know when you're just giving them a line. And the ones who make that connection, where, I like to tell leaders, everyone remembers the last conversation they had with you. And was it one where when that person walked away, they said, wow, Brian's pretty cool. I can't wait for Brian to visit the store again.
Yeah.
Or when they walk away, do they say, oh my God, I hope they don't come back here. Right. And it's that genuineness and that true interest and curiosity of, no, I genuinely want to know what gets you excited. What's your favorite part about working here? One of my favorite questions to ask on store visits was, hey, on the day when you're driving home and you're going to quit, because it was that kind of a day, what happened? And then if you actually listen and you start to hear themes across a district or a region or a store, then fix it. And there you are. Like, it's that easy. So,
Yeah, it is. It's that simple, isn't it? Right.
right.
One of the things in the book that a theme you really drive home is that your top performers have to know that they're top performers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I love to ask people, do your high potential people know they're your high potential people? And I get an answer like, well, I'm sure they do. I said, no. Do you tell your high performers they're high performers? Well, I mean, they got a good review. I'm sure they know that they are. It's like, okay. So when I do my keynote, I'm usually my speaking is before a break or, right before lunch or something. So I'll always say, do me a favor. When we take a break, whoever pops into your mind when you hear high performer, high potential, whoever that person on your team is, send them a quick text. Hey, I'm at a conference. I heard this speaker talking about high performers. It made me think of you. And I just wanted to send a note and say, thanks for being awesome at what you do. I said, please do that for me. I promise it's going to make their month. Just that text.
yeah, I think that's awesome. And it is simple, but really smart
Yeah.
and very, very
Yeah.
important for the folks that get that.
Brian, one of the things I love to talk about on this topic, and I talk about it in the book, is, I think the worst thing that happens to high performers, and it happens in every company every day, is they find out how valued they are about 10 seconds after they give their notice.
Yeah.
And they start to hear things that they've never heard before. And they see senior leaders reacting in a way they've never reacted before. And they're smart. And they look around and they say, I had to give my notice to be told I was a valued person here. What's that all about?
There's a super powerful line in the book where you talk about that and you say you might be able to persuade them to stay for a while,
Yeah.
but you've lost them. When they
Yeah.
come to you and say they're leaving, you've lost them.
Let them go. And it's one of the hardest concepts, but I'm sure you saw this throughout your career. The times where companies back up the truck and roll out the red carpet and name your price to stay, in my experience, almost always, ultimately, might be 3 months, 6 months, a year later, that leader still leaves.
Yeah, that really stuck with me because
Yeah.
it was true in my experience. And when
Yeah.
you get to that point with somebody, it's
Yeah.
already done.
Right.
As you talk about constructing culture
Yeah.
and building culture, you really talk a lot about how it starts with who you hire.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think one of the biggest gaps right now in corporate America is we hire leaders. I'll talk about leaders. It's true for non people leaders too, but uh, we hire leaders and we tell them what their job is. Hey, congratulations, you're the new VP of finance. Here's your office. We'll see you Monday. We don't hire leaders and say, hey, if you're going to work at this amazing company, here's what's precious to us. So in the book, I have this thing called LEAD, which is 8 questions that I think you should ask of every leader. And you can go through them or not. They're simple questions, but they're questions like,
Let's do it.
yeah. So, the first question. So for anyone who's listening, think about a leader that you've worked for. Now, I'm going to make a prediction that the person who popped into your head probably wasn't a great leader. And that's why I love doing this exercise, because when I'm doing speaking, I can see it in people's eyes. Doesn't matter. Whoever just popped into your mind. Here's the questions, and they're kind of yes or no. Do the leaders in your company, or did this leader create a culture high performers want to be a part of? Did they bring energy and enthusiasm to work every day? Do they support the direction of the company with no hidden agendas? And that's a big one. Do they build relationships at all levels of the organization? Do they manage the performance of their teams? Right? Are they decisive? And do they make a tough call when the tough call needs to be made? Do they help the company grow by developing people? And, nobody's ever called me after they read the book and said, how'd you come up with these things?
Right.
But I was lucky enough. My last role in corporate America was for a retailer. We had over 1,000 locations in 47 states. So we had lots of layers of leadership. And we took LEAD and we made it our interview guide. And then we were so serious about those questions or those expectations that we made it their annual review. Your bonus is based on creating a culture high performers want to be a part of. Now, what does that really mean? And that's what I get into in, other parts of my business where, it doesn't mean you're a cool boss, right? Creating a culture high performers want to be a part of is accepting the fact that one of my jobs as a leader is to not let underperformers show up every day, as an example.
The high
So, yeah,
performers know the underperformers are there.
if you want to know who's not a high performer, ask your highest performer and they will tell you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And yes, and Brian, to your question was a long answer. That is it. When you make the decision that we are going to set an expectation as a leadership team, and this is why values and mission statements, I don't get as excited about those because typically there's a disconnect, right? Integrity is a company value, and everybody knows the leader in sales, half of the stuff in Salesforce is bogus. And that's okay. But when you have expectations for leaders that, no, I'm going to bring energy and enthusiasm to work every day. I'm going to support the direction of the company with no hidden agendas, which means when I go out to share a message that my boss told me, I'm going to use we, not they. Hey, we are so excited as a leadership team about this new product. We can't wait to get it out versus, well, I guess they decided we need a new product. I'm not quite sure why. Don't kill the messenger. And there's such a big difference between that. So I get very passionate about it. So
I think it's powerful stuff, and it is simple stuff, Eric. And I think I'll tell you something that was a pet peeve of mine in a prior life. I'd go into a building and I'd say, "Why are we doing that?" Corporate said we need to.
oh,
I'm
yeah,
like, "Oh, it's the lowest form of leadership there is on the
yeah,
corporate side and on
right.
the field side."
Absolutely.
Um, I hear what you're saying about mission statements and company values. And if you're going to have them, it's so important that they're lined up
Yes.
with your actual behaviors
Yeah.
because there's no doubt it's a net negative if they're not.
Well, and yes, 100%. And they should be really simple and easy and resonate with how the senior leadership team shows up. So, obviously I worked at Best Buy and I absolutely stole one of the Best Buy values: have fun while being the best. And I have used it ever since I left. What an awesome, easy, amazing thing to sit down with your team and say, listen, we're going to have a lot of fun, but we're going to be the best. So what do we need to do to get there? And it's usually two things. I tell people you can have the best company that's ever been created if you're willing to do two things: not let underperformers show up every day, and not let assholes lead people. And that is almost it. If you do those two things, you're more than halfway there. So,
And do you think the a-holes are born or made?
boy, that is a great question. I usually, what I usually say is I love it when somebody asks me, "Hey, what's the definition of an asshole?" And I always tell them, I actually don't know what the definition is, but I know who they are in every company I've ever worked in.
You know
And I,
one when you see one.
yeah, and I think we are who we are. So, people will challenge me like, "Boy, you're pretty black and white. Like, you don't think a leader can change? You don't think a leader can take feedback?" I said, it depends. It depends on what needs to change. If you're a leader who's walked by the receptionist every morning and ignored him or her because they're not important enough for you to say good morning to, and now all of a sudden you're given feedback that you probably should build relationships at all levels of the organization. So the next day you say, "Good morning, how are you? How was your weekend?" You know what that person does? They said, "You haven't said hi to me in 4 years. What happened?" "Oh, he got feedback that he should be a nicer person." Now it's worse. Now you're
Right.
doing it because you were told you had to.
Um, I think you're 100% right. You have to be who you are.
Yeah,
You have to be,
yeah,
because you can't be anything else and
right,
sustain it.
right.
One of the things, the big themes I took from your book
Yeah,
was be the leader that people want to follow.
yeah,
Be the people, the person that people want to follow. Can
yeah,
you teach that, Eric?
yeah. It's kind of to your other question. I think we kind of are who we are, and you're either that kind of person who understands. And here's a big part of this: if you, for whatever reason, think as a VP, SVP, CEO that you are any more important than the newest member of the team that is an individual contributor in accounts payable, then you are not looking at your role the right way. And, one of the pivotal moments of my career, and I was so lucky. I was so lucky that, I started at T1, the first target ever, Roseville, Minnesota. And I'm old enough that when I started in 1995, I had a department leader who was there on grand opening day 34 years earlier. And I walked up to her and I introduced myself. I'm the college kid. I'm excited. I'm the new manager. And she said, "You're the new manager?" I said, "Yep." She said, "Well, let me tell you how this is going to work. I don't work for you. You work for me. And if you make my life easier and get me what I tell you I need, I'll make your life easier. And if you don't do that, it's not going to go well for you here." And I remember thinking, holy shit. And it was the greatest thing that could have happened to me on my first day of my career because she was 100% correct. So I just started asking people, "What do you need? What can I do to make your life easier? On the day when you're driving home and you want to quit, what happened? Because I don't want you to feel that way. I want you to love coming to work. And if you don't want to be here, then we've failed somehow and help us get better." You just have those kind of, and if you mean it, and you just have those kind of conversations. And that was how you would interact with people, which is why, it was a culture that, I haven't really seen, before or after for a lot of reasons, or in some ways anyway.
And one of the things, and there's nothing soft about what you're writing about here. There's high expectations,
Yeah.
there's accountability,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. In such a common sense way, you lay out how those things coexist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a great point to pull out of the book that I think people, based on the title or whatever, they might think, "Oh, this guy just likes to have a lot of fun." I've probably fired more people in my career than a lot of leaders, sometimes because of the role I had, head of HR, mass layoffs, whatever it might have been. But that doesn't mean you can't show people respect when you're having a really tough conversation. And great leaders, nobody likes to have tough conversations. I talk about that in the book. I joke. I never went home and high-fived the family. "Hey, I got to fire someone today," except for a couple times, because every now and then it's the right thing to do. But really, by and large, you don't get excited about it. Even people who are comfortable doing it don't look forward to it. But the difference is they don't avoid it.
Right.
And the leaders who are great leaders, but let that underperformer stay and let that bad leader continue to treat people poorly and they know it, they're not ever going to have the culture they could have.
Mhm.
So you're right. It's a lot of tough conversations. But
It
if you
is.
focus on creating a culture, you know who rewards you for that? Your high performers. You
Absolutely.
know who doesn't care if you ever do it? The people who probably shouldn't be there anyway.
Yeah. I always thought about it when I'd walk into a building and I would know in 5 minutes or less if I was in a great store, a good store, or a bad store.
For
And
sure.
Eric, this is 100%. I never walked into a building that was great where there wasn't a great store manager or leader.
Yeah.
And where there was a good store, there was a good store manager or leader.
Right.
And where there was a bad store, there was a problem and it needed change.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
needed change, and you needed to dive in and understand that right away.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think so much of a leadership role, whether it's politics or it's big business, whatever it
Yeah.
is to create clarity.
Yeah.
And you talk about that a little bit in the book, and it really stuck with me how you talked about
Yeah. Well, just to expand on your point, because I agree with you. How does it feel? You can right away. But one of the things that people always kind of get a funny look on their face that I talk about is the best way to reduce turnover is to fire more people. And I just kind of let it sit for a second because it sounds completely counterintuitive. It's like, no, the leader who's willing to come into a new organization, new division, new department, and say, hey, these are the high potentials. I'm going to tell them they're awesome every day and develop them. This leader needs to move on to their next adventure at our biggest competitor so they can go be a bad leader there. And this underperformer who's been phoning it in for 4 years doesn't get to work here anymore. And the leaders that have the courage to do those kind of things. I mean, I've seen retail stores that within 6 months drove turnover from highest in the district to one of the best in the company. And what was the one thing we did? Put a new store leader in there.
it. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's so simple, but I think it is so true, whatever your business is.
Yeah.
Um, you've had some changes in your career. You've
Yeah.
pursued a number of different things. Is there like an internal clock that you've had that said, you know what, time for a change, or I've done what I can do here?
I look back on my career and, I joke with people if I was smart enough to have done it on purpose, I would have been this, genius who, positioned himself to be a consultant. I wasn't smart and I'm not a genius and it was by accident, but I did. I've worked in Fortune 500, privately held, PE backed, family owned, you name it, kind of other than nonprofit. I've been in every environment you could be in. And when I reflect on it, early in my career, I was in too big of a hurry. I mean, when I really reflect, I left, my first retailer because the next retailer said they'd make me a store manager right away. And they did. But then I went back to the first retailer because I said, well, that was kind of immature on my part. As I got through the career, sometimes it wasn't my choice. I joke in the book. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have been fired twice, and losing your job is the most wonderfully terrible experience everyone should go through at least once. And as an adult, there's nothing more humbling than losing your job, whether it was a position in elimination or a firing. And so I have had a lot of things that have helped me reflect, but I think for me, it was always, hey, where's the next opportunity that I can try to get an environment to truly embrace all these, crazy concepts from the book. And in my last role in corporate, I had a senior leadership team and a CEO who was 100% aligned with kind of all the concepts and philosophies in the book. And I can tell you, it was the most amazing culture where Monday morning didn't suck. But it took us a year and a half of making some really hard choices with people to get the right team. And as soon as we had the right team, it was a rocket ship.
That's it's so powerful when it
Yeah.
all comes together like that.
Yeah.
And I I'll tell you what, this book, I couldn't give it a higher recommendation. I think it's fantastic. And for
Thank you.
everybody listening out there, there are great tools in it. There is a getting to know you uh, slide that Eric has in there that I did as an exercise. And it made me think, and it was just so interesting because one of the things you talk about in the book is how important it is to get to know the people.
Yeah.
You need to know they have a wife and 3 kids. You need
Right.
to know they love dogs. They
Yeah.
love the Vikings,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Right.
And you just can't phone that in. You have
No.
to live that.
And I talk about the fact that hey, good leaders take the time to get to know their team, but great leaders take the time to let their team get to know them. And a really great leader does both, right? And yeah, you can't get people excited and bring energy and enthusiasm to work every day if you don't know that this person on your team would love an opportunity to present to the board, and this person on your team would be mortified if you asked them to do that. They're both great people, but how do you know that? One of my favorite stories, and this is a little bit of a stretch, but it's a great retail story. I remember losing an hourly employee, and I did an exit interview, and she said, well, I was kind of surprised because I said I can't work Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but I'll work every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I was like, well, why did we let you go? Well, nobody ever asked why I wanted to work weekends. They just said, no, you have to work one day during the week. And I thought, that's just, it's a small but a huge example of that leader that said, hey, wait, you'll work every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for me in
Right,
retail. I don't care if you work Tuesday afternoon.
right, right. Hey, can you just touch on the 2 minute termination? I don't want to end on a negative note, but can you just touch on it?
Yeah, in the book I say, hey, if a termination takes more than 2 minutes, you've said too much. And a lot of people are like, wow, that's harsh, that's hardcore. But for anyone who's done it, for anyone who's had it done to them, anything after 2 minutes, and some might argue 2 minutes is a little too long. The work that leads up to being able to have a 2 minute conversation hopefully took days, weeks, and months of honest conversation. You're not hitting the mark. Do you understand what's expected? Here's what I'm going to, and then you get to that point where it's just not the right fit for the position. What people don't understand who've never had it done to them or done it before is that as soon as the words, we've made the decision to eliminate your position, they don't hear a single thing after that. They just want to go call their spouse, their best friend, whoever. And so, it's, and I, in the book, I talk about these 4 C's of termination, which is just kind of, staying calm and being committed and just not saying too much. Don't go down rabbit holes. The message is kind of clear and direct. And, it does sound a little harsh when people kind of read it, but I promise you, and I appreciate you asking about it. I promise it is the most respectful thing you could do.
And as you lay it out in the book, it's utterly incumbent upon you to do the job in leading people and
Yeah.
developing them, giving them direct feedback.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just critical. Listen, I could talk to you for hours about this.
Yeah.
I
Well,
can't recommend your book. I couldn't give it any higher recommendation. It's
well,
available at Amazon.
yep.
Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck by Eric Harkins. And Eric, what if they want to get an autograph copy? Can you help them out?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for your comments. That means a lot to me. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. Amazon, obviously, but yeah, hey, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website, ericharkins.com, find me there. But shoot me a note on LinkedIn. I'd love to sign one for you and personalize it. Maybe sometimes people want it for a gift or whatever. Happy to send one directly to you.
And
So I
and we'll
appreciate
put
that.
links on all
Yeah,
that on our website. Eric,
awesome.
I can't thank
Yeah,
you enough.
this
It
was
was
fun.
just great. And I have a feeling we'll talk again soon.
I have no
So
doubt. And
th-
really,
thank you so much for joining us today.
thanks for having me on as a guest. I really appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to the most important podcast ever with BJD. You can find us on Instagram at the most important podcast ever. I'm on TikTok, yup, at the most important pod. and my Facebook page. And if you have ideas for the show, Brian at the most important podcast ever at gmail.com. Excuse me, Brian at the most important podcast ever.com, and on our YouTube channel where we've had a lot of views. So we appreciate that. So until next time, keep looking for the extraordinary in the ordinary, and thank you.